The morning broadcast began like any other day on Earth, but within moments everything changed. Secretary General Patricia Hayes sat in the United Nations Command Center in New York, her coffee growing cold as she stared at the massive screens displaying an incoming transmission. The signal came from beyond the solar system, bearing the unmistakable signature of advanced alien technology. Nations around the world synchronized their communications networks. Scientists, politicians, and military personnel gathered in bunkers and command centers, all witnessing the same extraordinary moment. The transmission began with a deep, resonant voice that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the voice of the Galactic Council, an ancient federation that had ruled the known universe for over 3,000 years. The Council announced itself as the supreme governing body of all sentient life. Their representative, an entity known only as the hierarchical voice of the Zintharian Empire, delivered a decree that would alter humanity's future forever. The message was simple and absolute. Surrender all weapons, disband all military organizations, and submit completely to the Council's authority. Resistance would result in immediate and total annihilation. The transmission included holographic displays of 100 different alien species, all of them standing silently, their eyes empty of hope, their bodies bearing the marks of complete subjugation. This was the fate awaiting any species that dared to defy the Council. Patricia Hayes convened an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council within the hour. Representatives from every major nation gathered in person or via secure video link. The tension in the room was suffocating. China's delegate advocated for immediate surrender, fearing the loss of billions of lives. Russia's representative argued for negotiation and time to understand the Council's true intentions. The United States delegation remained silent, waiting for others to speak first. Commander Nathan Price of Earth's Space Defense Force requested an audience before the Council. He was a man in his early 50s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had witnessed 20 years of military service. His uniform bore numerous commendations, though his scars ran deeper than any medal could represent. He had spent his entire career preparing for threats beyond Earth's atmosphere, never truly believing he would face one. When Price entered the Council chamber, all eyes turned toward him. He walked to the podium with measured steps, his presence commanding immediate attention. His voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of steel. The Galactic Council speaks of annihilation as though it is inevitable, Price began, his words carefully chosen. But they make a fundamental error in their calculations. They believe that fear alone will force compliance. They base this assumption on thousands of years of conquest against species that had already surrendered their will to resist. But they have not accounted for humanity, he continued, describing how humans had survived ice ages, wars that consumed billions, diseases that decimated populations, and the constant struggle for survival across an entire planet. Humans had never simply accepted their fate. Throughout history, they had fought against impossible odds, often prevailing through ingenuity and sheer determination. "We will not surrender," Price concluded, his voice ringing through the chamber. "We will prepare, we will adapt, and we will resist. If this is the end, then we face it on our own terms." The chamber erupted. Some delegates shouted in anger, others in agreement. Patricia Hayes called for order, and after 3 hours of heated debate, the Security Council voted. By a narrow margin, the decision was made to reject the Galactic Council's demands and prepare humanity for war. The vote was transmitted back to the Council. Their response came within minutes, a simple acknowledgement followed by silence. That silence was somehow more terrifying than any threat could have been. Across Earth, sirens wailed as governments activated emergency protocols that had existed only in contingency plans. Military bases mobilized their forces. Scientists and research facilities around the world began working around the clock. In the depths of underground bunkers, humanity prepared for the impossible. 3 weeks after the Council's ultimatum, Commander Nathan Price stood on the observation deck of the orbital station, called Sentinel Prime. Below him, Earth rotated in serene beauty, unaware of the storm gathering just beyond its atmosphere. Price watched as military vessels descended from orbital shipyards, their hulls gleaming with fresh armor plating and experimental weapon systems. These were humanity's hope, though they were pathetically outnumbered by what was coming. Captain Amanda Foster arrived at Sentinel Prime, aboard a sleek destroyer named the USS Valiant. She was a woman in her mid-40s with sharp features and darker hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her reputation preceded her. She was the finest tactical commander in Earth's space fleet, known for her ability to make split-second decisions that saved lives. Price had hand-picked her to command the consolidated Earth defense fleet. "How many vessels can we field?" Price asked as Foster joined him on the observation deck. 283 combat-capable ships, Foster replied, her voice steady despite the weight of those numbers, including destroyers, cruisers, fighters, and support vessels. "We've armed them with everything we have, including the new plasma cannons and shield generators Dr. Morrison's team completed last week." "Against how many?" "Estimates suggest anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 Council warship," Foster said bluntly. "We're outgunned roughly 15 to 1, Price nodded slowly. He had expected as much. The odds were nearly impossible, but he had never believed in surrender. Below them, on Earth's surface, General Marcus Phillips was coordinating the mobilization of ground forces. Every soldier, every able-bodied citizen, was being prepared for either evacuation or defense. Underground cities were being expanded and fortified. Weapons caches were being distributed to civilian resistance movements worldwide. In a research facility buried 3 kilometers beneath the Swiss Alps, Dr. Rachel Morrison worked with barely a moment's rest. She was a woman in her late 30s with intelligent dark eyes and the focused intensity of someone who had dedicated her life to solving impossible problems. Her team of scientists from dozens of nations was racing against time to develop weapons, shields, and defense systems that might have even a marginal chance of effectiveness against vastly superior alien technology. "How much longer until the plasma cannons are refined?" asked Dr. Kevin Liu, her assistant, as Rachel studied holographic projections of their latest designs. "Another week, perhaps less," Rachel replied. "The prototype tests have been successful, but scaling them up for fleet-wide deployment is proving more complex than I anticipated. We're also developing a new shield matrix that should distribute the power more efficiently across multiple vessels, simultaneously." Rachel had been working on defense systems for 15 years before the Council's ultimatum. Suddenly, all her theoretical research had become desperately, urgently practical. She had not seen her family in 3 weeks, had barely slept, had consumed more coffee than seemed medically advisable. Her colleagues urged her to rest, but rest felt like a luxury humanity could not afford. Throughout Earth's nations, societies mobilized in ways unseen since the Great Wars of the 20th century. Factories retooled to produce military equipment instead of consumer goods. Scientists moved to secure facilities. Politicians gave speeches that were equal parts inspiring and terrifying. The population knew what was coming, and the collective human response was not despair, but defiance. The United Nations released a statement to be broadcast across all Earth's networks. Secretary General Patricia Hayes stood before cameras in dozens of languages, speaking to the billions of humans who wondered if this would be their final week alive. "We face an enemy unlike anything in our history," Patricia said. Her voice carried the weight of humanity's hopes. "The Galactic Council has ruled through fear and domination for millennia. They believe that fear will break us, that we will kneel before them as every other species has knelt. But they do not know us. Humanity has never accepted tyranny without resistance. We have fought through darkness before, and we will do so again. We fight not with the hope of certain victory, but with the determination of those who have nothing left to lose but their freedom." The broadcast was transmitted into space, sent as a defiant message across the galaxy. Signals would take years to reach the farthest regions of space, but they represented humanity's answer to the Galactic Council's ultimatum. Then, the sensors registered the approaching fleet. The Galactic Council's armada emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system on a Tuesday morning. Humanity's sensors detected them instantly, their massive forms blotting out the stars like a plague of locusts. 4,700 warships, each one dwarfing Earth's largest vessels, began their inexorable advance toward the planet. Captain Amanda Foster received the final order she had been both dreading and expecting: engage all hostile forces with maximum force. She stood on the bridge of her flagship, the destroyer Horizon, and watched the tactical display as enemy ships moved into formation. Her pilots and crew, drawn from every nation on Earth, prepared themselves for battle unlike any in human history. "All units report combat readiness," reported Lieutenant Devon Walsh, her communications officer. His voice was steady, but Foster could hear the tension underneath. "How long until weapons are in range?" Foster asked, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. 8 minutes, replied Commander Gregory Hayes, her tactical officer. He was no relation to the Secretary General, but like Patricia Hayes, he carried himself with quiet competence. "The forward squadrons are standing by." Foster took a deep breath. She thought of her family back on Earth, of her daughter who had asked her the previous night if the aliens would really come. She had said yes, they would come, and then she had held her daughter close and promised that humanity would not go down without a fight. It was the only promise she could make. "Launch all interceptor squadrons," Foster commanded. "Engage enemy vessels according to Combat Plan Delta 7. All ships maintain formation and watch for Council ambush tactics." Space erupted into chaos and violence. Human interceptor fighters accelerated toward the Council's fleet, their weapons charging as they closed the distance. The enemy vessels turned their weapons toward the oncoming attackers, unleashing a hellstorm of energy and matter. Foster watched as dozens of her fighters were obliterated in the first moments of contact. Her pilots died, their sacrifice buying moments of time for the larger capital ships to position themselves. Lieutenant James Cooper was one of humanity's finest pilots, a man in his early 30s with the reflexes of someone born to fly. His fighter wove through space with impossible grace, avoiding enemy fire through a combination of skill and luck. He launched his missiles at an enemy cruiser, watched them impact against the vessel's shields. The shields held barely, but they flickered. Cooper continued his attack, diving deeper into enemy formation despite the risk. Down on Earth's surface, General Marcus Phillips watched the battle unfold on tactical displays in a command bunker beneath the Pentagon. His role was different from Foster's, but no less critical. As the battle raged above, alien bombardment would eventually reach Earth's surface. His forces had to be ready to defend against invasion, to harass landing parties, to make the Council pay for every meter of Earth they conquered. In her laboratory, Dr. Rachel Morrison received real-time data from the space battle. The plasma cannons her team had developed were performing better than she had dared hope. Weapons that had been purely theoretical 3 months ago were now saving human lives in actual combat. But the Council's superior numbers were telling. For every enemy vessel destroyed, humanity lost 3 ships. The math was brutal and unforgiving. The battle lasted for hours. Captain Foster orchestrated her smaller fleet with the precision of a symphony conductor, creating killing zones where the Council's superior numbers became a liability rather than an advantage. She ordered coordinated attacks that concentrated fire on single enemy vessels, overwhelming their shields before moving to the next target. Her strategy was simple. Since she could not win through attrition, she would win through tactics and cunning. By the end of the first day of battle, humanity had destroyed or severely damaged 418 enemy vessels. The cost had been 130 of Earth's ships. The Galactic Council sent a transmission. The battle would cease temporarily and they would demand Earth surrender one final time. If Earth refused, annihilation would follow. The transmission arrived directly to Secretary General Patricia Hayes. She convened an emergency session of the Security Council. Some delegates argued for surrender, pointing to the enormous losses already suffered. Others advocated for continued resistance. Patricia listened to all arguments, her expression betraying nothing of her inner thoughts. When everyone had spoken, Patricia asked for a communication channel to be opened to Captain Foster in space. Within seconds, Foster's face appeared on the screen. "Captain, what do you recommend?" Patricia asked. Foster did not hesitate. "We continue fighting. We've proven that we can hurt them, that we can make them bleed. If we surrender now, we betray everyone who died today. I believe we can win this." Patricia turned to the Security Council. "Then we continue fighting. Prepare our response for transmission." The message went out into space, carried by radio waves to Captain Foster's fleet and beyond to the Galactic Council. It was delivered by Secretary General Patricia Hayes herself, her voice steady and calm. "The people of Earth have made their decision. We will not surrender. We will not kneel. We will fight for our freedom and our future. If you destroy us, then destroy us, but we will not compromise. This is our final answer." Captain Foster received the transmission on the bridge of the horizon. She looked at her crew, saw the determination in their eyes, and felt pride welling up in her chest. "All units, this is Foster," she said, her voice broadcast across the entire fleet. "We continue the fight. Let's show these council bastards what humanity is made of. The battle resumed, more intense than before. The council's armada pressed its attack with renewed ferocity, but they were learning something they had not expected to learn. Humanity was learning too, adapting tactics in real time, exploiting weaknesses in the council's armor. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Galactic Council was being fought to a standstill by an inferior force. The battle continued for weeks without either side achieving decisive victory. The Council expected Earth to eventually break under the pressure, but humanity proved far more resilient than anticipated. More importantly, news of Earth's resistance began spreading throughout the galaxy through hidden networks and rebel sympathizers who had long chafed under the Council's rule. On the Catharan homeworld, an insectoid civilization that had been enslaved by the Council for over 800 years, received secret transmissions of the battle footage. The Catharan saw something extraordinary, a species fighting against the Council and surviving. That single fact ignited something that had been suppressed for centuries. A warrior named Vexthar, who had been born into subjugation but had never accepted the inevitability of that subjugation, began organizing resistance cells across the Catharan territories. Vexthar was a being of impressive stature, even by Catharan standards, with chitinous armor that gleamed dark purple in the light of their twin suns. Their species communicated through a combination of pheromones and vocalizations that human translators had finally learned to interpret through decades of careful study. When Vexthar spoke in secret chambers, their words carried the weight of ancient dreams of freedom. "Humanity defies the Council," Vexthar told the assembled Catharan leaders. "For the first time in our collective memory, a species fights back and does not immediately fall. This is our moment. This is our chance to break free from the chains that have held us captive." The vote among the Catharan leadership was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The Catharan collective would rebel. They launched coordinated strikes against every Council installation in their sector. Military vessels that had been under the Council's control for centuries suddenly turned against their masters. The Catharan rebellion spread like wildfire through their territories, inspiring others. The Vorthan uprising followed. The Veld's independence movement rose up. The crystalline consciousness of Silith declared its autonomy. Across the galaxy, species that had accepted subjugation for generations suddenly remembered why resistance mattered. The Galactic Council, which had never faced coordinated rebellion across multiple star systems, found itself stretched to the breaking point. Commander Nathan Price received the first contact from an alien commander named Vexithar through a carefully encrypted channel. The message was short but significant. The Catharan offered alliance with Earth against their mutual enemy. Price conveyed the message to Patricia Hayes, and she made the most important decision of her presidency. "Request an in-person meeting," Patricia instructed. "If the Catharan are serious about alliance, we need to establish trust and begin coordinating military strategy." The meeting took place on a neutral space station designated Station Nexus, carefully selected as territory that neither humanity nor the Council had full claim to. Patricia Hayes brought with her Commander Nathan Price, Captain Amanda Foster, and a small delegation of military advisors and diplomats. They gathered in a conference room where the atmosphere was thick with tension and the weight of history. Vexthar arrived with their own delegation of Catharan warriors and diplomats. The first moment of contact was tense, with humans and Catharan regarding each other with the wariness of two species meeting for the first time under extraordinary circumstances. But Patricia stepped forward, her hand extended in the ancient human gesture of peaceful greeting. Vexthar understood the gesture and reciprocated with a Catharan greeting of their own, a subtle shift in coloration of their exoskeleton accompanied by a series of harmonic vocalizations. "We fight a common enemy," Vexthar said, their translator rendering the complex sounds into human speech. "For centuries my people have suffered under the Council's rule. You have shown us something we thought lost forever, that resistance is possible." "We fight for freedom," Patricia replied. "Freedom for all species, not just humanity. If our alliance can achieve that, then this struggle will have meaning beyond our mere survival." The negotiation that followed lasted 18 hours. Together, they crafted a military alliance unlike anything the galaxy had previously witnessed. The human fleet would coordinate with Catharan strike forces. Intelligence would be shared. Weapons and technology would be exchanged. Perhaps most importantly, The symbolic weight of the alliance was enormous. If humans and Ketharin could unite, perhaps all oppressed species could do the same. Word of the Human-Ketharin alliance spread rapidly through rebel networks. Other species that had been considering rebellion now moved openly against the Council. The Vorthan sent representatives to meet with Patricia and Price. The Veld's independence movement coordinated attacks. The Silith offered their computational abilities to help coordinate rebel operations. What had begun as humanity's lonely stand became a galaxy-wide uprising. Dr. Rachel Morrison was informed of the Alliance developments while working in her laboratory. She immediately recognized the implications. With allied species contributing their own technologies and scientific knowledge, the weapons she was developing could be refined further, could become even more effective against the Council's forces. "We're not alone anymore," she told her team, her voice carrying profound relief and renewed determination. "We have partners in this fight. It's no longer Earth against the galaxy. It's the galaxy against tyranny." The Council realized the situation was spiraling beyond their control. Their forces, once seemingly invincible, were now fighting a war on multiple fronts against an alliance of previously subjugated species. For the first time in 3 millennia, the Galactic Council understood fear. The final phase of the war began with a coordinated assault across the galaxy. The United Rebel Alliance, now numbering dozens of species and hundreds of thousands of warships, moved toward the Council's core territories. The Council's response was desperate and increasingly chaotic. Their 3,000-year reign, built on the assumption that their power was unchallengeable, was crumbling. The decisive battle took place near the neutral zone surrounding Nexus Prime, a planet that served as a crossroads for galactic commerce and diplomacy. Here the Rebel Alliance and the weakened Galactic Council would meet in final combat. The battle involved over 10,000 vessels, making it the largest military engagement in recorded galactic history. Captain Amanda Foster commanded the human contingent of the Allied fleet, coordinating with Vexthar and other species commanders through real-time communication networks that had been established specifically for this conflict. The strategy was complex and bold. They would create a pincer movement, attacking the Council's fleet from multiple vectors simultaneously. This would prevent the Council from concentrating their forces and would maximize the effectiveness of the more maneuverable rebel ships against the Council's larger but less flexible vessels. The battle opened with a cascade of missile fire and energy, weapons that lit up space with brilliant explosions. Human fighters worked alongside Ketharin assault craft. Fourth-hand battleships coordinated fire with human destroyers. It was magnificent chaos, and for the first time in the battle for Earth's freedom, humanity was not fighting for survival but for victory. Lieutenant James Cooper led a squadron of human fighters in a devastating attack on a Council flagship. His squadron wove through the enemy formation, their weapons firing with precision. Cooper himself targeted the flagship's shield generator, diving his fighter directly toward the enemy vessel despite the risk. His missiles struck true and the shield flickered and failed. Seconds later, a coordinated strike from Ketharin assault craft finished the job, and the enemy flagship exploded in a cascading chain reaction. Below, in the command center of the Alliance fleet, Commander Nathan Price watched the battle unfold across tactical displays. He was no longer actively commanding the military operations, having ceded that responsibility to Foster and Vexthar, but his presence was symbolic. The human who had refused to surrender was here, bearing witness to the moment when an oppressed galaxy threw off its chains. Dr. Rachel Morrison observed the battle from a research station in secure orbit. The weapons her team had developed were performing perfectly, in some cases exceeding all expected parameters. She watched as Alliance vessels equipped with the new plasma cannons cut through Council ships with terrifying efficiency. She felt pride and profound sadness simultaneously, knowing that her creations were ending lives, but understanding that those lives were being ended in defense of freedom. The battle raged for 36 hours without pause. Vessels were destroyed by the hundreds. Soldiers and beings from a dozen different species died in the cold vacuum of space or in the explosive death throes of their dying ships. But the tide was unmistakably turning in favor of the Alliance. As the Council's fleet was progressively destroyed or driven into retreat, the leadership attempted to escape. They boarded their flagship, a massive vessel called the Dominion Prime, and prepared to jump to faster-than-light speed. But their escape route had been anticipated. An alliance blockade intercepted the Dominion Prime, surrounding it with dozens of rebel vessels. The flagship tried to fight its way through but was overwhelmed. The ship's core systems failed, and the Dominion Prime was destroyed, taking with it the Galactic Council's ruling triumvirate and most of their central command structure. The remaining Council forces, seeing their leadership destroyed and their fleet in ruins, ceased resistance. Some surrendered, while others attempted to flee into deep space, but they were cut off, surrounded, and ultimately forced to submit. The Galactic Council, which had ruled through fear and domination for 3,000 years, had fallen in a matter of weeks to an alliance forged by a species from a backward colony world. As the battle ended, and the dust of combat began to settle, Patricia Hayes sent a broadcast to all rebel forces and remaining Council vessels. This day marks the beginning of a new era for the galaxy. The age of the Galactic Council has ended. Let it be known that freedom has been claimed by those who were willing to fight for it. We now turn our attention to rebuilding, to establishing a new order based not on fear and domination, but on cooperation and mutual respect. 3 months after the destruction of the Galactic Council, representatives from 97 different species gathered on Nexus Prime to establish the new Galactic Federation. The symbolism of the location was intentional. Nexus Prime had been a place of commerce and neutral diplomacy under the old Council. Now it would become the birthplace of genuine democracy and cooperation. Captain Amanda Foster stood on an observation platform overlooking the Federation Congress in session. She had resigned her military commission shortly after the final battle. Unable to continue in that role now that the immediate threat had passed, she planned to return to Earth and attempt to rebuild some semblance of a normal life, though she suspected that nothing would ever be truly normal again. The war had changed everyone. Secretary General Patricia Hayes approached the podium as the session opened. Behind her stood members from dozens of species, all of them equals in this new arrangement. There was no hierarchy, no supreme council that ruled over others. Instead, decisions would be made through consensus, with each species having voice and vote. 3 months ago, we were engaged in a war for our very survival, Patricia began, addressing the assembled delegates. Today we gather not as conquerors or conquered, but as free peoples seeking to build something better than what came before. The Galactic Council's legacy was one of oppression. Our legacy will be one of liberation and cooperation. Vexthar of the Catharan rose to speak. Their body language conveyed deep emotion in their chitin and posture as they addressed the Congress. My people were enslaved for 800 years, Vexthar said. We learned to exist in chains, to believe that freedom was an illusion. But then Earth showed us that resistance was not only possible but necessary. Humanity's defiance inspired not just my species but dozens of others. For this, the Catharan Collective extends our eternal gratitude and our commitment to this new federation. Commander Nathan Price, now retired from military service, attended the Congress as an advisor to Patricia Hayes. He sat in the gallery, watching as representatives from species that had never known freedom began drafting the Constitution for the new Galactic Federation. He had spent 20 years of his career preparing for an external threat, but he had not expected to live to see victory. Now, watching the birth of a new galactic order, he felt a profound sense of purpose fulfilled. Dr. Rachel Morrison was honored as one of the architects of the Alliance's military victory. The scientific community across all allied species recognized her contributions to weapons development. But more importantly, she had been asked to lead a joint research initiative dedicated to peaceful technologies that would benefit all member species of the Federation. She accepted the position eagerly, relieved to finally direct her considerable intellect toward creation rather than destruction. Young people from Earth, Catharan, Vorthan, and dozens of other species mingled in the halls and courtyards of Nexus Prime. Some engaged in cultural exchange, sharing art and music from their homeworlds. Others began forming friendships that transcended the species barriers that had previously seemed so insurmountable. Military officers from Allied forces began collaborating on Federation defense strategies that would protect all member worlds from external threats, while never again allowing any single power to dominate others. Ships carrying ambassadors, scientists, and cultural delegations began arriving at Earth in unprecedented numbers. For the first time in human history, Earth was not an isolated world on the galactic periphery, but a destination sought out by civilizations from across the known universe. They came to meet the species that had defied the Galactic Council, that had inspired a galaxy-wide uprising, that had sacrificed everything for freedom. Patricia Hayes stood in the office of the Secretary General, looking out at the planet below. The war had left scars on Earth. Cities bore the marks of bombardment. Millions had died. The global economy was in shambles. But humanity had survived, and more than that, humanity had liberated an entire galaxy from tyranny. Amanda Foster finally saw her daughter again after months of being separated by military duty. The reunion took place in a quiet park near her home in New Zealand. Her daughter, Sarah, had grown several inches during the war and had developed a maturity beyond her years. They embraced, and Foster felt the weight of everything finally begin to lift from her shoulders. "Did we win, Mom?" Sarah asked quietly. "We did," Foster replied. "More than that, we changed everything. The galaxy is different now because we refuse to accept defeat." Commander Nathan Price, on leave from his new position as Chief Strategic Advisor to the Federation Defense Council, visited the memorial dedicated to those who had died in the war. Over 2 billion human names were engraved on the structure, representing the humans who had sacrificed everything. There were memorials to Catharan warriors, to Vorthon soldiers, to members of dozens of species who had all given their lives in the pursuit of freedom. Price stood before the monument in silence, honoring the fallen and acknowledging the price of the victory they had won. Dr. Rachel Morrison worked with her international team on the design of new orbital stations that would facilitate trade and cultural exchange between species. These stations would be beautiful symbols of cooperation, places where the free peoples of the galaxy could meet without fear. The first one was already under construction, to be named Station Harmony. As months turned into a year, Earth became increasingly integrated into galactic civilization. Human scientists collaborated with alien researchers. Human artists performed at festivals across the known worlds. Human military officers served in the Federation Defense Force alongside warriors from dozens of other species. The isolation of Earth's past was definitively over. Late one evening, Patricia Hayes sat alone in her office and reflected on everything that had happened. A year ago, the Galactic Council had delivered an ultimatum that had seemed absolutely certain to result in humanity's destruction. In that moment, Patricia had made the decision to resist, a decision that had ultimately liberated billions of beings across the galaxy from oppression. The choice had been costly, but the alternative would have been infinitely worse. She received a communication from Vexthar, transmitted across the galactic network. The Catharan leader expressed the hope that humans and Catharan could continue to work together to build a galaxy where no species would ever again dominate another through fear. Patricia responded with an affirmation of that hope and a commitment to the principles of freedom and cooperation. The story of humanity's defiance spread throughout the galaxy and beyond. It became a teaching point in schools across dozens of species. Young beings learned about the humans from the isolated blue planet, who had refused to accept subjugation, and in doing so had inspired an entire galaxy to rise up and claim its freedom. The legend of Earth's defiance grew with each retelling until it became almost mythical, but for those who had lived through the events, the memory remained fresh and raw. The cost had been measured in trillions of lives across the galaxy, but the cost of continued subjugation would have been infinite. In the years following the war, members of all allied species came to understand that the pain of their struggle had been the price of their liberation. Captain Amanda Foster eventually returned to active duty, not as a military commander but as a diplomat and ambassador, helping to build bridges between human civilization and the countless other species now allied in the Federation. She found meaning in this new role, understanding that the fight for freedom did not end with the destruction of the Galactic Council. It continued every day in the small choices made by individuals working to build a society based on cooperation rather than domination. As Earth grew in prominence within the galactic community, the planet's story was retold with wonder and inspiration. The species that had once been seen as insignificant, isolated, and easily conquered had instead become the catalyst for the greatest transformation in galactic history. The galaxy had been ordered by fear for 3,000 years. Earth had shown that it could be ordered by hope instead. The sun rose over Earth just as it had for billions of years. But now ships from hundreds of worlds orbited the planet, and the skies were filled with the promise of a better future. Humanity had defied the odds, had refused to accept oppression, and had ultimately liberated not just itself but an entire galaxy. This was the dawn of a new age, an age of freedom and cooperation, born from humanity's defiance and watered with the sacrifice of countless beings across the stars. And in that new dawn, anything seemed possible. The galaxy obeyed in fear no longer. The galaxy had learned, through humanity's example, that it was worth fighting for freedom. And having learned that lesson, it would never forget.